She was never meant to be his. But fate doesn't care about rules. Aria Hale stared at the towering gates of Wolf Mansion, feeling the cold wind bite through her thin jacket. The place looked more like a fortress than a home. Tall iron bars, stone walls, and a heavy silence that seemed to swallow every sound. She took a deep breath, clutching her small suitcase tighter. It was just another job, she told herself. 1 month as a caretaker for an elderly woman. Nothing more. The butler, an older man with a stiff posture, opened the door without a word and led her inside. The air smelled faintly of pine and something else, something wild and sharp. Paintings lined the walls, mostly portraits of men with the same piercing gray eyes. She followed the butler through the long hallway until he stopped before a heavy oak door. "Mrs. Wolfe is waiting," he said and stepped aside. Inside, the room was warm and filled with sunlight. An elegant woman with silver-streaked hair sat in an armchair near the window, a blanket over her lap. Evelyn Wolfe looked frail but graceful, her smile kind and knowing. "You must be Aria," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you for coming." "It's my pleasure, Mrs. Wolfe," Aria replied with a polite smile. "I'll do my best to help however I can." Evelyn reached out and touched her hand. Her skin was cool and her gaze lingered for a second too long. "You have a gentle spirit. It's been a while since this house felt that." Before Aria could respond, the door opened again. The air shifted. A tall man stepped in, his presence immediately filling the room. He was dressed in a dark shirt and slacks, his sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms. His hair was jet black and his gray eyes seemed to look straight through her. "Mother," he said curtly, not glancing at Aria. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Damon, this is Aria Hale. She'll be staying with us for a few weeks." His eyes finally met hers, sharp and unreadable. "I wasn't informed of this." "You were too busy to be informed," Evelyn said lightly as if used to his tone. "Aria will help me with my medication and daily routine. I'm sure you won't even notice her." Something flickered in Damon's eyes. He nodded once, turning toward the door. "Just make sure she stays out of the West Wing." When he left, the silence in the room deepened. Evelyn sighed softly. "He means well. The world has taught him to hide it." Aria nodded, though her heart was still racing. There was something strange about him, something that made her skin tingle and her pulse quicken. The first few days passed quietly. Aria fell into a routine, preparing Evelyn's meals, reading to her, and organizing her medications. The mansion was always quiet except for the soft crackle of the fireplace. But at night, when the wind rose, she often heard things, deep growls echoing from the West Wing, the sound of footsteps when no one was there. One evening, she went to close the curtains in the hallway and caught sight of Damon outside. He stood near the edge of the woods, his head tilted upward toward the moon. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched at his sides as if he were fighting something invisible. Then he turned suddenly, eyes glowing faintly silver in the dark. Aria gasped and stepped back, her heart pounding. When she looked again, he was gone. The next morning, Evelyn noticed her pale face and asked if she'd slept well. Aria hesitated but nodded. She didn't want to seem foolish. Yet every time she looked at Damon, she felt that same strange pull, an invisible thread connecting them, drawing her closer even when she tried to resist. Later that afternoon, while arranging books in Evelyn's room, Aria asked softly, "Does your son always seem distant?" Evelyn's expression turned thoughtful. "Damon carries a burden most cannot understand. He lost much at a young age. It made him cold. But he isn't heartless." Aria smiled faintly. "I don't think he is." That evening, the rain came without warning. The storm was heavy, shaking the windows and filling the halls with the sound of thunder. Evelyn had fallen asleep early, so Aria went downstairs to check the windows. As she passed Damon's office, she saw the door slightly open and light spilling through. She hesitated, then knocked softly. "Mr. Wolfe? The storm's getting stronger. Do you want me to close the windows in here?" He looked up from behind his desk. His sleeves were rolled up again and his jaw was tense. "I can handle it." "I wasn't saying you couldn't," she said, almost smiling. "I was just offering." His eyes narrowed, but not in anger, more in curiosity. "Most people don't talk to me that way." "Maybe they should," she replied before she could stop herself. For the first time he almost smiled. It was fleeting, but it made her chest tighten. Then thunder crashed again and the lights flickered. She flinched slightly, and before she knew it, he was standing beside her, his hand brushing her arm. The touch was light, but the spark that shot through her skin made her gasp. Damon stepped back immediately, eyes wide with something like shock. His breathing quickened and his voice came out rough. "You should go to your room, Aria." She frowned. "Did I do something wrong? Go. Now." His tone left no room for argument. She turned to leave, but before she could reach the hallway, Evelyn's faint voice called from the stairs. "Damon, don't fight it anymore. She's the one who can save you." Aria froze, turning toward her. "What does that mean?" Damon's expression darkened. "Mother, stop." Evelyn's eyes were full of tears. The moon goddess wouldn't send her here without a reason. Damon's hand slammed against the wall, startling them both. "Enough." He looked at Aria then, his voice low and raw. "You have no idea what you've walked into. Stay away from me." He left the room, the sound of his footsteps echoing down the hall. Aria stood frozen, her heart thudding painfully. Evelyn reached for her hand, whispering, "Don't be afraid, dear. Sometimes fate chooses for us, even when we're not ready." That night, Aria couldn't sleep. Her skin still burned where Damon had touched her. She tossed and turned, trying to shake the feeling, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw his silver eyes, wild, haunted, and filled with something deeper than anger. Down the hall, Damon stood alone in his study, staring out into the rain. His reflection in the glass shifted, his eyes glowing faintly again. He clenched his fists and muttered under his breath, "The moon goddess has cursed me again. My mate is human." The truth hit him like a blade. The bond that sparked between them wasn't imagination. It was real. And if he gave in to it, if he marked her, he'd destroy her. Outside, thunder rolled again, and somewhere deep within the mansion, a wolf's low growl echoed through the night. The next few days passed with an uncomfortable stillness. Damon kept to himself, his usual presence at the mansion fading into distant footsteps and closed doors. Aria tried to focus on her work, but his absence only made the strange pull between them stronger. Every time she brought breakfast to Evelyn's room, she felt the tension in the air, the way the house seemed to hold its breath whenever his name was mentioned. Evelyn often asked her to sit and talk. She spoke about the garden that no one tended anymore, the years she'd spent watching her son bury himself in work. "He's built walls around his heart," she said one morning, sipping her tea. "But those walls are cracking, and it frightens him more than he'll ever admit." Aria didn't know how to respond. She only knew that since that stormy night, Damon had been avoiding her as if she carried something dangerous. Yet the memory of that spark between them lingered. How real it had felt, how alive she had been in that moment. One afternoon, she decided to deliver Evelyn's new medication list to Damon's office at Wolf Industries. The butler gave her the address and she promised it would be quick. When she arrived, the building towered above the city, steel, glass, and quiet power. Employees greeted her politely, though most looked nervous when they mentioned their boss's name. She knocked on his office door and his deep voice said, "Come in." He was standing by the window, phone in hand, his tone cold as he gave orders about a new acquisition. When he hung up, his gaze flicked to her. "What are you doing here?" "I came to give you your mother's new prescription notes," she said calmly, placing the envelope on his desk. "She asked me to bring them." He didn't move. "You could have left them with my assistant." "I know. But I wanted to make sure you actually saw them," she replied, meeting his eyes. He studied her quietly as if trying to understand her motives. "You're not afraid of me," he said finally. Aria folded her arms. "Should I be?" His jaw tightened. "If you knew what I am, you would run." Something in his voice made her pause. He wasn't threatening her, he was warning her. Still she held his gaze. "Then maybe you should tell me instead of pushing me away." Before he could answer, the office door opened and another man stepped inside. His presence was different, sharper, more openly dangerous. His eyes were a darker shade of gray, his smile coldly charming. "Damon Wolf," the man drawled. "Still hiding behind your empire, I see." Damon's voice hardened. "What do you want, Marcus?" Marcus looked at Aria and smirked. "I see you've finally allowed humans into your world. Bold of you." "This doesn't concern her," Damon snapped. "Oh, I think it does," Marcus said lightly, stepping closer to Aria. "I can smell it, the bond. You found your mate, didn't you?" Aria blinked in confusion, but Damon's growl silenced the room. It was low and animalistic, not quite human. Marcus chuckled darkly. Careful, old friend. You wouldn't want her to see the monster underneath all that control. Damon moved in front of her, his tone dangerous. Leave. Marcus smiled as he turned toward the door. I'll leave, but you know how this ends. You can't protect her from your curse. When the blood moon rises, she'll die just like the last one. The door closed behind him, leaving a heavy silence. Aria stared at Damon, her heart pounding. What did he mean? Nothing that concerns you, he said, his voice rough. You're lying, she whispered. Tell me what he meant, Damon. He turned away, his hands clenched at his sides. There's a curse on my bloodline. If I claim a mate, if I mark her, she dies. That's what I am, Aria. That's what he meant. Her breath caught. That's not possible. It's real, he said, his tone final. That's why you need to stay away from me. But she didn't move. If you were truly as dangerous as you say, you wouldn't be warning me. You'd have let me go the day I arrived. He looked at her then, the pain in his eyes raw and unguarded. I can't let you go. That's the problem. For a long moment neither spoke. The sound of the rain against the window filled the silence. Then he said softly, Go home, Aria. She wanted to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. It wasn't anger, it was fear. Not for himself, but for her. She nodded slowly and left the office, her thoughts tangled and heavy. That night she couldn't sleep again. She sat by her window, staring at the moon. Every word he'd said replayed in her head. A curse that kills his mate. A rival who knows too much. And that strange pull between them that no warning could break. The next morning the mansion was unusually quiet. Evelyn sat by the window, her hands trembling slightly as she poured tea. Marcus Black visited the estate today, she said softly. He asked questions about you. Aria frowned. Why would he? Because he knows what you are to Damon, Evelyn said. And he'll use it to hurt him. Aria felt a chill run through her. Then tell me how to stop it. Evelyn's eyes glistened. The curse can only be broken by love strong enough to survive the blood moon. But no one has ever succeeded. The bond consumes before it heals. Aria's hands trembled. Then I'll find another way. Before Evelyn could respond, a crash echoed from outside, the sound of shattering glass. Aria rushed toward the hallway, and through the window she saw movement in the trees. A shadow darted toward the forest, dragging something. She didn't think, she ran out into the cold night. The air was sharp, her breath coming in short bursts as she followed the trail. The figure ahead moved fast, but she caught a glimpse of Marcus's smirk before he vanished into the darkness. A growl tore through the forest, low and deep. Damon appeared from the shadows, his eyes glowing silver. He was already half-shifted, his control barely holding. Get behind me, he said, his voice distorted. Marcus's laughter echoed through the trees. You can't protect her forever, Damon. When the blood moon rises, she'll choose who truly deserves her. The ground shook as Damon lunged forward, tackling Marcus to the ground. The fight was brutal, claws, teeth and fury. Aria could only watch in horror as the two alpha wolves clashed, the air filled with snarls and snapping bones. When Marcus finally fled, Damon turned toward her, his chest rising and falling heavily. She stepped closer, trembling. You shouldn't have done that for me. I couldn't stop myself, he said, his voice rough, still edged with his wolf. Every time you're near, it gets harder to control. Her voice was barely a whisper. Then don't fight it. He looked at her as if she'd said something impossible. For a moment he almost believed it. Then he stepped back, his eyes full of conflict. You don't understand. You're mine, but you can never be with me. Before she could answer, the wind shifted and Damon froze. His senses caught something she couldn't see, Marcus's scent still lingering. His jaw tightened. He'll come for you again. What are you going to do? She asked quietly. I'm going to end this, he said. Even if it kills me. That night the mansion felt colder than ever. Evelyn sat alone by the fire, tears glistening in her eyes as Damon prepared to leave. The blood moon is 3 nights away, she whispered. You can't break a curse born of vengeance. I have to try, he said. When Aria found his note hours later, her heart sank. Stay inside. Don't follow me. It was written in his sharp, heavy hand. But she couldn't obey. She couldn't let him face Marcus alone, not when his life and hers were already bound by something neither of them could escape. The night of the blood moon came quietly. The sky burned a deep shade of crimson, and the wind carried a strange heaviness that made the world feel still. Aria stood by the window of her small room, her heart restless. Damon had been gone for 2 days and there'd been no word, no sign, not even from Evelyn. The old woman had grown weaker, speaking little except to murmur prayers under her breath. Aria couldn't stay behind any longer. Every part of her told her he was in danger, and whatever bond existed between them pulled her toward him like a heartbeat she couldn't silence. She left the mansion before dawn, following the trail that led through the forest behind the estate. The trees whispered and shifted, the moonlight breaking through in pieces. She didn't know where she was going, only that something inside her knew the way. After what felt like hours, she reached a clearing surrounded by ancient stones. The air shimmered faintly as if the ground itself was alive. At the center stood Damon, his back to her, his shirt torn, his body tense. Across from him stood Marcus, his eyes bright with fury and triumph. "You shouldn't have come," Damon said without turning, his voice rough, catching her scent before he saw her. "I couldn't stay behind," Aria said quietly. "I had to find you." Marcus laughed, low and cruel. "How touching." The human couldn't resist the monster. "Let her go," Damon said, stepping forward. "This ends tonight." Marcus's smirk deepened. "You're right. It ends when she dies, just like the others." Aria looked between them, confused and afraid. "What is he talking about?" Marcus circled closer. "Didn't he tell you? You're not the first human his cursed heart has loved. But this time he'll have to watch it happen." "Enough," Damon growled. His eyes began to glow, silver bleeding into them as his control slipped. The earth beneath his feet trembled. "You've taken enough from me." They collided with a force that shook the ground. Aria stumbled back as the two alphas fought, their strength shattering stone and bone alike. Damon was faster, fueled by rage and desperation, but Marcus's attacks were wild and cruel. Claws tore through flesh, snarls filled the air, and blood stained the ground beneath the moonlight. When Marcus finally faltered, Damon slammed him to the ground. His hand closed around Marcus's throat, his voice shaking. "You'll never touch her again." But Marcus only smiled weakly. "Kill me then, and watch your curse finish what I started." Aria saw the pain flicker across Damon's face before he struck. The forest went silent. Marcus's body went still. Damon's chest heaved as he fell to his knees beside him, the glow in his eyes fading. Aria rushed forward, kneeling beside him. "It's over," she whispered. "You're free now." He shook his head slowly, blood running down his arm. "No. The blood moon isn't done. The curse, it feeds on the bond." He looked at her with such raw sorrow it made her heart ache. "If I claim you now, you'll die before dawn." Her hands trembled as she touched his face. "Then don't claim me. Just stay." But the light around them shifted, the moon glowing brighter. The wind rose, and the same energy she'd felt that night in the mansion began to hum between them again. Their bond was alive, growing stronger, pulling at them both. Evelyn appeared at the edge of the clearing, her cloak fluttering in the wind. Her eyes were filled with tears as she stepped closer. "The curse was never about death," she said softly. "It was about sacrifice. Only true love freely given can end it." Aria looked at her in shock. "What does that mean?" "It means you must choose," Evelyn said, her voice trembling. "If you love him enough to face the curse, your heart will either break it, or be consumed by it." Damon's hand tightened around Aria's wrist. "No. I won't risk you." She met his eyes, her voice steady even as tears gathered in her lashes. "You already have. The moment you tried to protect me, you risked everything." He shook his head. "Aria, please." She leaned in and kissed him, gentle but certain. The bond flared instantly, heat and light flooding through them both. Damon gasped, trying to pull back, but she held on, her hands cupping his face as the world around them began to glow. Pain surged through him and he shouted her name, but she didn't stop. The light grew blinding, wrapping around them in a rush of warmth and power. Aria's heart felt like it would burst, and then just silence. When the light faded, Damon was on the ground, breathing hard. Aria lay beside him, her skin pale and still. For a long time he couldn't move. The weight of it crushed him, the bond that once burned between them now cold. He brushed a trembling hand through her hair. "I told you not to do this," he whispered. "You were supposed to live." Evelyn knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face. "Look at her, Damon," she whispered. "Really look." He did. And then he saw it. The faint shimmer of light under Aria's skin, pulsing softly in time with his heartbeat. Her fingers twitched, then her chest rose with a small, shaky breath. Her eyes fluttered open, the color bright and alive. The curse had lifted. Damon stared at her, unable to speak. She smiled weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told you, fate doesn't scare me." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might vanish again. For the first time in years his body felt whole, his soul quiet. The pain that had haunted him for so long was gone, replaced by something pure and steady. The forest around them grew still, the red in the sky fading into pale silver. Evelyn watched in silence, her hands clasped as the moon's glow softened above them. "It's over," she murmured. "The blood moon has been answered." Damon stood slowly, keeping Aria close. Marcus's body had already turned to dust, leaving only the faint scent of ash. He looked down at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You broke the curse," he said softly. "You saved me." Aria leaned into him, tired but smiling. "We saved each other." They walked back toward the mansion as dawn broke, the light gentle through the trees. The house that had once felt cold now seemed to breathe again. Evelyn waited for them at the door, her eyes full of relief and love. Days later, as Aria sat with Damon on the terrace, she looked at him and saw a man no longer haunted. He was still the same, strong, commanding, confident, but now his eyes held peace. He reached for her hand, tracing slow circles against her skin. "Do you ever wonder what happens now?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Now I build something worth protecting. With you." Her fingers tightened around his. "You mean it?" He nodded. "For once I'm not afraid of what I feel. You're my mate, Aria. Not forbidden. Not cursed. Just mine." The words carried no arrogance, only truth. She leaned her head against his shoulder, watching the sunlight touch the garden below. For the first time since she'd entered his life, the mansion felt like a home. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, they both knew that what had begun as a curse had become their freedom. The moon had chosen them not to suffer, but to prove that even the most broken souls could still find a way to love without fear. If you loved their story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.